पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज।
Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to you wherever you may be. My name is Wajahat Khan. I'm an independent journalist based here in New York City.
And I'm Michael Kugelman, also in New York City today.
All right, this is the weekly South Asia briefing. It's been a busy week in South Asia. The Pakistanis have begun the court-martial proceedings against former DG ISI, the intelligence chief, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid. This is kind of a big deal because the ISI is kind of a big deal, a state within the state in that country. We're going to be talking about what this means for the Pakistani military, what this specifically means for the Pakistani military chief, who's now flexing more than anyone else in his office has in the past. And as we know, he's also placed himself firmly to be in power for the next 8 years. Then we're going to pivot to India, which is also flexing, accusing Washington's deep state of targeting India. A series of tweets from senior BJP leadership has stirred a storm between Delhi and Washington. What does this mean? Is this bipartisan support for India finally fading in Washington? And then we will take a tour of Afghanistan, where a top Taliban minister has just been assassinated. The Pakistanis are siding with the Taliban against Daesh, ISIS, KP in that region. Is this a new pitch to get Washington's attention? These are some of the stories we'll be watching, and I'm going to be accompanied by my wingman, the South Asia wala of this program, the resident expert, my go-to guy for all things Washington and South Asia related, Michael Kugelman of the Wilson Center. Welcome to Gotham, Mike.
Thank you. It's good to be here, though it's always so cold, but it's good to be here.
All right, stop complaining like you're a Southerner. You're not too far. You're from Washington. So stop complaining like you're from, wherever down south. But here we go. The ISI, the mighty ISI is, well, not under fire, but one of his chiefs, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, is now officially being tried in a court-martial. Now, we know he's been linked to the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, but what does this mean for the Pakistani military? How far do you think it'll go to really gun for Khan, which it clearly is doing in the recent press release by the ISPR, which is the military's public relations arm? We saw Khan not named, but effectively pointed towards that's where this trial is headed. What do you think is going on?
I mean, as is oftentimes the case when we're talking about issues like this, there's very few people that really do know what's going on. There's so much speculation every day about what's going on, and it's hard to say. But I think that what we're seeing with this development with Faiz Hamid is, I think. Another reminder of just how deep and bitter this confrontation is between the current army leadership and Khan, because as you say, I mean, we know that Khan, saw Hamid as an ally. Hamid saw Khan as an ally. We all know the story. And the fact that now, for the first time, you have a former intel chief getting this treatment, court-martial, indictment and all, the fact that the fact that he has that relationship with Khan is not coincidental in this case. Though there's so many different angles that one could talk about here, and I would just briefly refer to the fact that he has been linked to, or the army wants to link Hamid to the events of May 9th, 2023, which was also pretty much an unprecedented act or event in Pakistan's history for political protesters to target military facilities. So, I think that one could take sort of a different type of approach and say, okay, this is just the military essentially laying down the law and proving that its own are not immune from accountability. You could argue that, well, it wants to show that a senior, that a three-star general who was linked to the May 9th protests is going to pay for it legally. But I come back to the issue of his links to Khan, and I think that's what's so important. In terms of what's coming next with Khan, we've talked about this many times before. My view is that the state would much prefer that he just stay in jail for a long time, to the point that people start to forget about him and he becomes irrelevant. But I just don't see things going in that direction.
Right. Let's take some of that. The strand I want to pull is the fact that you mentioned, and a lot of people agree, that the army rather, is going after its own. Now, generals have been investigated before, they've been tried before, but never court-martialed before. This general stands out because this general was quite close to Khan, as you have pointed out. But what does this say about the extent this army chief, General Asim Munir, is willing to go to eat one of his own? Generals have been tried in the past, but been forgiven. They've served jail time, but that jail time has been cut in half, shortened even more than that, for worse crimes, espionage, for example. But in this case, this is a new precedent the army chief has set. What does this say about the army chief? Do you think he's firmly, I guess, in place enough and strong enough in his position to do this? Do you think there's going to be any pushback from within the military?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it gets into some very sensitive issues, particularly the issue of the type of support that Khan still enjoys within some ranks of the military, the lower ranks in particular, and perhaps some of the mid-level ranks as well. And my understanding is that he has retained some loyalties and support from some of those lower ranks. Now, given the way these things work, lower level officer would not be in a position to start pushing back against the army chief or the army leadership. That's not the way it works. But if you go further to the top, I don't know what's going on there, but it's true that the current army chief, I think, has received more anger from the public, or has been the target of more anger from the public than we've seen from an army chief in Pakistan for quite some time. I think after the Bin Laden raid, Kiani was the subject of some anger, but nothing like what we're seeing now, for sure. And so that, but I think my sense is that the army leadership is united at this point with Munir on these steps that need to be taken to curb Khan and to try to send a very strong message to those backers of his that have been in high places, including the former ISI chief Hamid. So I don't think that Munir is on the back foot. I do think that he is on the back foot in other contexts, particularly in terms of how he's perceived by the public and that challenge. That's something that's, I'm sure, is very concerning for him. But I don't think that he's getting any pushback from what he's doing now. One would think that if there was going to be pushback, we wouldn't have seen these developments. I mean, Hamid was arrested, was it 4 months ago? It was in August, I think. So several months have gone by, and 4 months later, we have the indictment. One would think that the indictment would not have happened had there been significant levels of resistance to Munir's actions within the higher ranks of the military.
Yeah, let's remind our viewers as well that Munir is firmly placed to not just finish his tenure in office, which finishes officially next year, but he's also given himself 7 more years after that. Now, he's going to be in power well into the next decade if things go his way. But again, Mike, it's a complicated animal, the Pakistani military, one of the world's largest, not homogenous at all, very heterogeneous. You've covered them, you know them, you talk to them. What's the mood within the army in that sense? Yes, you mentioned nobody's going to rebel against the chief right now, but how sustainable is this in the long run, both for Munir's own office as well as his politics?
I mean, quite frankly, I had thought once we saw what happened with the election, when PTI supported candidates, PTI supported independents did so well. I think that was such a blow to the army leadership because of its desire and hope to see PTI not do well. I thought that would have been seen as something that would have made it difficult for Munir to be in a position where he could have a long period as army chief. And then, as I had mentioned before, the anti-army anger that we've seen from the public on levels that we haven't seen for so long. So I was actually thinking that he may not last that long. But indeed, as you say, he's now whether we want to say he extended himself or he's in a position where he now
you
has
can say whatever you want. You can say whatever you want.
It's that to me suggests that he's in a good place. And I've got to say, I would not want to be in his shoes. His job must be an extremely stressful one. It's been a few years, And given what he's dealing with, I just, from the perspective of my mental health, I would not want to have to hold a position that long. But clearly, this is someone that wants to stick it out, that I think wants to try to reverse course, perhaps to try to engineer a shift in the trajectory of his legacy, because, these folks are always thinking about their legacies down the road. I think given how Munir has been perceived and everything he's dealt with, I don't think he would necessarily have the best legacy, so to speak, if he were to step down next year. But maybe he thinks that by, being around for another few years, he could reverse course and change things for the better. Who knows? We'll see.
That's interesting. I'm sure that's going to encourage him to stick around for even beyond 10 years at this rate, Mike, but careful with what you wish for. Okay, let's pivot. Let's go to India. Now, I know you're in New York right now working on an India project. I appreciate that. But in the larger sense, forget New York. It's what the Indians have been up to in the US and elsewhere that has stirred a bit of a storm. There's lots of components, moving parts, but it starts with a tweet or a series of tweets and a presser by senior BJP leadership accusing the US's deep state, very Trumpian of them to use that term, accusing the US's deep state of targeting India, targeting India's economy, targeting US bilateral ties with India. And that has stirred a response from the embassy, the US embassy in Delhi. Now we know, for big picture purposes, the Indians are one of those rare countries, sort of like the Israelis, who enjoy a bipartisan support in Washington. The Dems and the Republicans love India. They are going for better ties with India. It's a long arc, almost 20, 25 years. And this administration, the Biden administration, has actually given the Indians a lot of leverage. They forgave sanctions, which could have been slammed after the purchase of Russian weapons by the Indians. They have gone kind of soft on the Indians on other areas, for example, investigating them about transnational repression. There's a lot of examples you cite in your foreign policy briefing as well. And yet, it seems that the Indians are flexing. Now, are they flexing for Trump? Are they trying to appeal to Trump at a time when you have been warning on this very show the Indians aren't in the best of health when it comes to the narrative in Washington? They've been sort of losing the narrative in Washington. This has finally happened. How do you take this? And is bipartisan support for India eroding slowly in DC?
Yeah, thanks. This is such a fascinating story, these BJP allegations. That's why I wanted to make it the lead story in the column this week, because it was just so striking in that, as you note, the U.S. and the Biden administration has seemingly bent over backwards, so to speak, to illustrate its commitment to partnership, and that doesn't only entail sending arms and increasing cooperation along many different lines, trade, energy, tech, and so on, so many other things. But it also involves, I would argue, giving India a lot of free passes, whether that entails saying less than it could about the state of democracy in India. The Biden administration has not held back from saying a lot about the state of democracy in Bangladesh, for example. You and I both know it has not said as much as many would like it to say about the state of democracy in Pakistan. Anyway, so it's given, there's that. And also, indeed, as you note, India's gotten sanctions waivers to do business with Iran, to build a port in Chabahar. And, the U.S. has essentially said that it's okay with India increasing its energy imports from Russia and continuing to import arms from Russia. So this all suggests to me, why this is like the opposite of trying to destabilize India. But I think that we could understand where the BJP was coming from, and we have to distinguish here. This was not the Indian government that made these allegations; it was the ruling party. Of course, the Indian government is the ruling party in a literal sense, but it was the BJP Twitter handle, and it was also several senior BJP officials who are not members of the government now who are laying out these allegations. I think it's to make it to be very simple about it. I think this is a case of the BJP playing some politics, exploiting some sentiment across much of the public in India, which shows concerns about many different aspects of U.S. policy. You described some of them: U.S. policy in Bangladesh, the Khalistan issue, the complaints about rights and democracy, and also the Adani indictment, which is something that a lot of a lot of members of the public in India think that this was overreach on the part of the U.S. government, which is very interesting. So I think that the BJP was reelected for a third term in government back in June, but it was a lesser than stellar performance in the polls. And as you know, Modi now has to govern through a coalition. So I think this was a case of the BJP trying to leverage the sentiment among the public, and I think it worked given their reaction in the Twitter sphere or the X-sphere or whatever you want to call it now, from many supporters of the BJP. But what I would say here, and this is what I think is particularly interesting, you made a key point, which I made as well in the column, that that Trump and many of Trump's top allies have themselves raised concerns about what they describe as the deep state, and they claim they've been victims of it. So here is the BJP essentially trying to align itself with the incoming Trump administration by referring to this deep state in the U.S. that is causing all these problems for Modi and for the government. So perhaps this was a signal from the BJP, not the Indian government, but the BJP saying, well, look, we may see eye to eye on this. Maybe you understand why we're concerned about what's happening with the deep state in the U.S., and you'll deal with it. And that'll help our partnership get even better. So I think there might be something to that signal. There are some in India, though, that would argue that, no, this was not meant as a signal to the Trump administration. It's meant to be a signal to the deep state in the U.S., which is this bureaucracy, it's unelected and so on. But I think it would be too coincidental for these allegations against the U.S. deep state to come after Donald Trump, who has been so vocal in his criticism of the U.S. deep state, was elected. So that's how I look at this.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think it's brilliant politics and brilliant optics from the Indians, right? Divvy it up, make sure it comes from the political party, not the government. The government is mum. Make sure you speak Trump. You don't speak English. They're speaking Trump, deep state. Make sure that this flack, which has been coming in from so many parts of the world, and not just Washington, and not international media, for example, the FT, so many other organizations, hedge funds have been doing reports on these guys, regulators, everybody's been targeting the Indians, putting it all under the deep state umbrella and not using an official government account, but a semi-official or a pseudo-official affiliated political account, and then saying, hey, we're still friends, right? It's quite interesting. What I find this as an interesting ploy as well is and you did mention this in the briefing, the Kash Patels of the world, who are also quite anti-deep state, are being appealed to, and they might be investigating, as we know, the future cases, like, for example, India's own misdoings and misdeeds in North America. They obviously won't be investigating the killing of the Sikh dissident leadership in Canada, but the attempted murder of the hit here, right here in New York City. In fact, downtown where you're at, Mike, is something which is going to come up, and that is going to get interesting. Speaking of proper pronunciations, Khalil Haqqani has been assassinated in Afghanistan. People get assassinated in Afghanistan every day. Lots of Taliban commanders have seen the end of days since they took over. It hasn't been smooth for them, but this guy stands out. He is the brother of the leader, the founder of the Haqqani network, Jalaluddin Haqqani. He is the uncle of much feared Sirajuddin Haqqani. He was the refugee minister till yesterday when he was assassinated. The Taliban, as we know, are split into two camps right now. There's the Haqqani or Kabul or Eastern camp, which are the pro-Pakistan groups. These are groups which are affiliated with the Haqqani network, which Pakistan has backed for decades. And then there's the more hardline camps in the south, where the religious leadership of the Taliban resides in Kandahar. These two sides have been at war, but meanwhile, there's a third party here as well, which is ISIS, which is formed by both international elements as well as local elements, which were sidelined, which were too hardcore to be in mainstream Taliban country. The Haqqanis have blamed ISIS for this hit. The Pakistanis are standing with them, even though ISIS has not said that it has committed this hit. It's strange, but it seems that, according to my networks, it seems that the Pakistanis and the Haqqanis, the good Taliban, are sort of beginning to pitch a new anti-ISIS narrative. Now, we know that the Americans have they put their hands up every time you mention ISIS in the region. They have the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad has mentioned it as a threat as well. The former SRAP has mentioned it as a threat as well. The TTP does not concern the Americans. The Baloch don't concern the Americans. ISIS does concern the Americans more than any other group operating in this region. And now ISIS is killing Taliban leaders. What does this mean? Are the Americans being pitched a new anti-ISIS initiative by the Afghans and the Pakistanis, or something more simpler is at work here? What's going on?
Yeah, I really don't think it has anything to do with trying to get the Americans' attention. I mean, as you know, the Americans already are very focused on ISKP. I think it's quite clear that that's viewed as the biggest, one of the biggest terrorist threats these days from a U.S. perspective. That'll be Trump's view as well, I'm sure. Yeah. Though, of course, we'll have to see what plays out in Syria. There could be new threats that emerge there. It's interesting in that some of the most immediate reactions to Haqqani's death came from Pakistan, where we had several leaders, including Dar, who expressed what appeared to be, sadness at Haqqani's death. I see Haqqani as a terrorist. I certainly don't have any sympathy for him. But to me, this seems like a case of, all kinds of speculation and noise. I think that the simplest explanation is probably the likeliest. I do imagine it was ISKP that did this. You're right, they have not claimed responsibility, but I think they would have something to gain, ISKP would, by not claiming responsibility, to ensure that you have this uncertainty and anxiety, which could then strengthen theories and speculation that this is an indication of these fissures within the Taliban starting to play out very violently. And that doesn't make the Taliban look good. And of course, ISKP is a rival of the Taliban. There's been some speculation that I've seen that Pakistan could have been behind this in some way. To me, that makes no sense, given how concerned Pakistan is about the TTP issue, and it has been trying to talk to the Taliban for quite some time to try to find ways to incentivize the Taliban to try to help Pakistan on the TTP issue. It hasn't really worked at this point. So for Pakistan to do anything that could result in the Taliban's top leadership thinking that Pakistan is actually going after the Taliban itself or Haqqani, that would not help Pakistan's cause, to put it very mildly. But yeah, I suspect that this was ISKP and that they have strategic reasons for not acknowledging or for not claiming the attack.
Yeah, it's unclear if the Pakistanis would get their own assets, and the Haqqanis are definitely their own assets. It will also exacerbate the situation. Pakistan's been quite tenuously trying to calm down the Taliban, who many top leaders have written Pakistan off, haven't been very kind to them diplomatically or otherwise. I know you had said that the U.S. doesn't need to be pitched. It's already quite convinced that the ISKP is a big deal. But don't you think that at a time when the Mike Waltzes of the world, who have served in Afghanistan, think that the pullout out of there in 2020 was a disaster, and have pushed there's a lot of unfinished business in Afghanistan. Those chaps who are going to be in this incoming cabinet in the White House, those chaps are going to be, very intrigued about the ISKP's ability to target top Taliban leadership, and thus say, hey, maybe we need to now work with the Pakistanis and the Afghans on this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that someone like Waltz would be a very receptive audience in this regard. But my point is that, someone like Waltz doesn't need a reminder that ISKP is a big concern.
I get it.
He'll be ready to focus on that, and I'm sure that Trump will as well.
All right, Michael Kugelman, welcome to New York City. I hope we can meet later on tonight, Mike, offline. But thanks again for the weekly South Asia briefing. Mike writes a wonderful brief, a wonderful version of his thoughts in the Foreign Policy Magazine's weekly column, also called the South Asia Briefing. And that is for subscribers. But if you're really nice to him, he might send you a non-sub copy, which I have the pleasure of getting earlier today. Welcome. Thanks again for being on the show, Mike. And I'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to put on my top coat adventure into this very chilly weather here in New York. I don't know how you deal with it. But
stop complaining. Stop complaining. Man up. Man up. I will talk to you soon, my friend. You take care.
Thank you. You too.
All right. That was Mike Kugelman. I'm Wajahat Khan. Share, like, subscribe, and comment. Support independent journalism. And we will see you next week with the next Foreign Policy South Asia briefing.
पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज